final speaker before we close and move to our reception is David Mindell, who is a professor in engineering, a professor of aeronautics and astronautics, as well as a professor of history of technology. So you probably never met someone, at least I hadn't met someone until I met David, who holds both titles. And he has a really special and unique background and perspective in studying the evolution of manufacturing and now working on thinking about the future, which I believe will be the frame for his remarks.
Thanks, John. Last year at the symposium, John asked me to speak first. So I had a very well-fed, well-caffeinated, well-rested, fresh group. And today I'm here after 13 really interesting panels, and I'm standing between you and cocktails. So I'll be brief. But John asked me to summarize a little bit and maybe synthesize and look forward. And a number of us MIT faculty, in fact, pretty much every MIT faculty member who was part of one of the panels has been meeting over the course of the semester to think about what's next in terms of manufacturing, and a lot of the themes that we touched on are also touched on actually in greater depth here today. So I want to talk about industrial transformation. That's a term that's been mentioned a few times. I think that's a great term for where we are. And you know, what is the next paradigm of production that will fuse social and economic and technological change to achieve increases in productivity and other societal goals like decarbonization? I'm a historian, as John mentioned. I don't actually count industrial revolutions. And I will point out wonderfully, refreshingly, that one thing that no one mentioned today was Industry 4.0, which I think is great, or IoT. But we do think about paradigms of production that capture periods of transformation. And the major one, of course, is the Industrial Revolution in Britain that brought steam power particularly and combined it with textile production in the British Midlands, which was mentioned earlier today, and also really followed on what a lot of people now call the Industrial Enlightenment, bringing the ideas of the Enlightenment specifically to the idea of manufacturing as a way to improve and transform society. There's the interchangeable parts production revolution in the United States, sometimes known as the American system, which led to the rise of modern management and eventually in the early 20th century to assembly line production, particularly culminating in the Second World War in the US and other countries' response to the Second World War. There's the semiconductor manufacturing and the foundry system, which we heard about today. Lean production, which originated in Japan and was brought to the US by some of our colleagues here at MIT. Each of these were characterized by and also coupled to technological changes, of course, increases in productivity, changes in the nature of work. A lot of historians will remind you that the Industrial Revolution was actually preceded by the Industrious Revolution, just changes in how people went about their work on a daily basis. And indeed, we are at a moment of work transformation that I don't think anyone will disagree has yet to fully play itself out, instigated by the pandemic and the remote work revolution. Actually, Paul Krugman has an interesting column on that today. Changes in the nature of work and in labor relations, changes in life for ordinary people, as well as the political changes that came around them. So as we've heard today, we're in this moment, and I think it's actually remarkable how much, in a way, agreement for all the diversity of what we've heard about today. Many people coming from very different places and backgrounds were singing very similar tunes. We're in a moment of infrastructure, of manufacturing, of materials, and in some way a return to, or at least a recognition of that messy physical life that we all depend on, starting with that toilet paper shortage, which is a bit of a humorous anecdote, and at the same time really brought these ideas to popular culture in a way they hadn't been. In fact, my old uncle at Thanksgiving in the fall of 2021 kept saying to me, "What's going on with all this about the chain supply? Why are everybody worrying about the chain supply?" And I was like, what is he talking about? And then I realized he really meant supply chain. But the fact that my uncle, who was not a technological or industrial person at all, was actually thinking about that was an indication of a kind of consciousness there, which we've now has become much deeper. But people in this room have been thinking about these problems, in many cases, for our whole careers. So it became clear in the last 3 or 4 years, actually to quote a great article in The Atlantic, that to decarbonize America, we cannot de-industrialize and we must re-industrialize. And that's this moment of industrial transformation. We have to learn how to supply our own basic needs much better. And I think this is a worthy goal and worthy of all of our highest technologies, whether it's AI and quantum computing or anything else that's brand new. How do we apply it towards supplying these needs? What are we building toward? What is a vision for an industrial future that people can rally around? I think in some level, everyone we've heard today has a version of this in their mind. And again, I don't think those versions are incompatible, but it's not always explicitly articulated. Bad news, I'm not going to predict that for you today. But I think for a group like this and for us at MIT, the question's actually not about making predictions, but it is about choosing what we want to have happen and then helping to make that happen. As a few examples, to add to the straight measures of productivity, we're adding resilience of different kinds, whether it's climate or geopolitical or even pandemic resilience, decarbonization, good jobs in an environment of labor scarcity. We're living in the physical world, of course, longer development cycles for regulated, safety-critical industrial systems. We just heard about the challenges of investing in those systems, and I've spent a lot of time working in that space. We haven't yet, and we may not, figure out how to innovate in these sectors in ways that rival the rates of these software-based consumer tools that we've become so used to for the last couple of years. And maybe we shouldn't. Maybe it's appropriate that they take longer. If you think about a kind of paradigm of the genius product that arrives from nowhere, and that's at some level the cultural image of the technologies that we've been living with for the last 20 years. I want to think about ways to think about technology and technological change differently. And as we think about industrial futures, I want to think about how do we talk about the industrial future in the non-Industry 4.0 way, that is in a way that's not utopian, and really kind of embraces, I think, what everyone in this room expresses, which is the humility that we all feel of dealing with real physical systems, how complex they are, how dangerous they can be, what happens when they go wrong, how long it takes to get them right, and how much work it takes to keep them going, even when they're familiar and well-worn. And I like, actually, Chris Love in his talk talked about moving beyond discovery first. And so I'm just going to close here with maybe a kind of David Letterman-inspired top 10 list of ways to think about industrial futures that are not utopian. And again, I'm not going to put it all together to tell you what the industrial future will look like, but I think these may be helpful rules. First, focus mostly on human needs: food, water, shelter, energy, mobility, work. And I say mostly, actually, because as I look at the Industrial Revolution, it's actually impressive how much the demand for luxury goods played in spurring the Industrial Revolution. So luxury goods have a real role to play. But getting people to and from work every single day on time with dignity in an efficient and clean way is a really hard thing to do. And again, worthy of the best of all of these technologies that MIT or anywhere else can bring to bear. Number two, think in systems. and in 30-year cycles. And again, this last panel was just beautifully articulating why that's so important. And maybe I'm just dating myself. 30 years used to sound like a long time. But for net zero 2050, that's under 30 years from now. We better have most of what we need to deploy then available now. I like to think I don't have too much self-interest in that. 30 years is just about how long I think I'll probably be on this earth. Third, imagine systems in human and in natural contexts. I think these are two things that the original Industrial Revolution got rather wrong, the problem of environment and the problem of labor. And every system has to be imagined within those rather than abstracted out. 4, emphasize adoption. What makes people choose to change? What makes people choose to do things that they've been doing for a long time differently? Again, we talked about the valley of death. To me, that's very often an adoption problem. Oh, great technology, love the product, I'm happy with how I do things. That's usually a rational response, by the way. It's more irrational for people to actually choose to change. I don't think we know as much about adoption as we might like, although actually the government now has adoption readiness levels, ARLs, which is very interesting. 5th, design for resilience and flexibility. We've spoken a lot about that. 6, get excited about maintenance and repair. 2 things that Americans are not particularly good at getting excited about. I also heard up to here today, I like this, buy less, fix more. Maintaining systems is a huge challenge. Not only is it important to maintain them, but I actually also think, and I'll come to this in a minute, that's a source of innovation. When you spend a lot of time with the system seeing as it goes wrong, a lot of innovation happens there. I'm losing count here. I think that's 7. Value knowledge at every level of work. A lot of the history of industrial management has been on the idea that those workers, those lowly workers, don't know anything. We're going to build it all into the fixtures. We're going to build it all into the software. And yet, time and time again, the more you look, the more you see how much skill people bring to every task. And economists like to talk about low-skill workers, but mostly they mean uneducated when they say that. And if you look at how someone cleans a floor or maintains a tire, there's a lot more skill in there than most people are used to seeing. And of course, that leads into all of the workforce conversations. 8, and this builds very much on Suzanne Berger's work and Bill Bonvillian's and others here, marry product innovation to process innovation. Didn't get mentioned too much today, but one of the reasons manufacturing is so important is because, again, it's a source of innovation. And China realized that very beautifully. And even for Apple, design here, build there was really, took a lot of people from Apple to make that work. And those 2 things are not nearly as separable as the economists thought they were. And then 9, everything needs to be made somewhere, and its corollary, everything needs to get from there to here. And again, these are all things that people today have articulated beautifully. What is the source of the material? We are now increasingly economically and even ethically accountable for going very, very deep into those supply chains and understanding where they come from. You can't change the kind of car you drive without thinking about cobalt and lithium and so on, and how they get here. So that's really just a first cut at kind of capturing what I actually think is, on the one hand, fairly straightforward. I see a lot of people nodding their heads. I don't think any of this is revolutionary. And at the same time, it is a way to think about technology and industrial systems that's been hidden by a lot of the hype and a lot of the focus on, again, the genius product that comes from nowhere, or the pure software world, or the pure service economy. We're back in the material world, and I think it's really up to the people in this room to lead this new transformation, which I do think is of an epic scale, and at a moment that is, if we get it right, comparable to the original Industrial Revolution from the 1700 to 1800 period. Thanks so much.